إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Welcome to another lesson. So this lesson now, last lesson we looked at the job of Rasulullah and his early childhood. This lesson, based on the next chapter, it's to do with the Rasulullah trading as a partner with Khadijatul Kubra sallallahu alayha. And then the chapter concludes with the marriage, and all chapters do this. But my lecture online, what I'm going to give now, turned out a bit long, so we didn't get to the marriage. So the marriage will be next week, and this chapter is one of those thinking chapters again that we need to think about. Okay, so I brought this up just to remind you again, the family of Abu Talib. So he had Talib, Aqil, Ja'far and Ali. And from the daughters, we know for sure that he had somebody called Hani. She was known as Fakhita, and she had Jumana and Reita. The sources are, there's differences in the sources regarding if he had 3 extra daughters or 2 extra daughters, or which ones were, real daughters. But we do know Hani, and I think Jumana we know for sure, but Reita, we don't know for sure. It's in the books. There's also probably another one as well, but we know the first 2. And why I'm showing you this is because the next part is very interesting. Okay, so Rasulullah had asked for the hand of Abu Talib's daughter. Did any of you know this? Okay, this is surprising information now. This is like really surprising information. And I was surprised that it's also not mentioned in, I haven't come across it in any Seerah book myself. Right? Any of the Seerah books that I source for teaching, I haven't come across this. It's a vague and obscure story, but there is a hadith associated with it. So where we look at the story and we will look at the hadith. I don't know why it's not mentioned. Right, some of the weaker stories are all mentioned in the Seerah. Every book of Seerah you read has 1 or 2 stories that the others don't have, or they choose to include something and somebody else chooses to include a 3rd story, and then somebody else will not introduce them at all. Right? This story is very rare, so you're not going to come across it in many books. It's in there, no doubt, because that's where the source is coming from. But in the English translations, I haven't seen it in any of the books. So Hani, as we know, she was the daughter of Abu Talib, and Rasulullah was living with his uncle Abu Talib at that time. So there were, it says 2 distinct proposals across Makkah and Medina, and the Quran clarified her status. Okay. Right, so there were 2 separate incidents regarding Rasulullah and his relationship with Fakhita. So the first one is that they had a relationship as a cousin, as a brother and sister. They were living together from childhood. I think they spent 17 years together. Can both of you hear me, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right, so they spent 17 years together as brother and sister in the same household. And as Rasulullah grew up and she grew up, when it was time for him to marry, he asked Abu Talib for her hand. He asked Abu Talib for the hand of Abu Talib's daughter, his cousin. Abu Talib refused. Now, we need to understand this, because this story, I did see it in a book written by a non-Muslim, right? And this book I will reference later on as well. And as with many, she's not an Orientalist, she's just an author. She's a Jewish atheist, and she's written 2 or 3 books on Islam. One is to do with the Sunni Shia split, and one is to do with, one's called Muhammad, the First Muslim. It's a good book, I like it, for 1 or 2 reasons, not associated with Seerah directly, but I can see the huge problems in that book as well, because she's got the typical mind of somebody who thinks that there is no God, and he was not a prophet. He was a reformer that had deep, troubling thoughts about his society. This is the angle that most Orientalists come from, right? That he had a troubling understanding of the decadence and the deprivations and the weakness of his own society, and he formulated this religion in a bid to raise his society out of their jahiliyyah and bring them onto the modern world stage, right? So the Quranic verses to do with social reformation, they are not Quranic verses in the eyes of the Orientalists. He formulated them himself, and what his real mission was to forge everybody to live as one cohesive society, and the rights mentioned in the Quran and everything like that. So none of it is wahi, it's all his own ideas put together. He's a social reformer. Well, we know he's not a social reformer. We know that Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is a prophet, Rasul, right? So those verses came from Allah. And for sure, as any practical man, any man who thinks for his society, yes, they have ideas of social reform, but can they put them into play? No. Could Rasulullah put any of his ideas pre the time he was sent? He was always a prophet, even from before he was declared a prophet. He was always a prophet with Allah. So, did he have any power to make any change? No. Right? So it's only after prophethood that Allah said, go and do this, and he started to preach, and it made the change. It doesn't make a difference whether you say that he never had no ideas of social reform and then Allah made him do social reform, or whether he had preconceived ideas of social reform. I'm a Muslim, and I don't have a problem with accepting that he most probably, because all humans do, had preconceived ideas of social reform for his society. He was unable to put them into action due to his position. We know, as we will read the Seerah, we'll find out exactly what his position was, the weakness of his position, and the strength of all the other tribal leaders, chiefs, and the elderly. So he couldn't make change. But when God said, go and do this, now there's a godly command. There's a command from upon high. This shy Muhammad, peace be upon him, the one who was never in the limelight, very quiet, just getting about his daily business, trying to provide for his family, all of a sudden he was forced into the limelight by God's command, and God said, tell them this. Start from Tawheed, then we'll move on to purifying them as a society. We purify them internally, then we make a connection between them and Allah, and then we'll purify them in their society. Right? So this is the only person that I've seen mention this story. Right? I did some digging and I found out some stuff which we're going to present today. So Abu Talib declined, and also there's one sheikh, he mentioned this, and it's mentioned. It is mentioned online. You'll find people mentioning it, but in the sources, it's not something that you'll easily find. So Abu Talib declined, and he married her to Hubayra ibn Abi Wahab al-Makhzumi instead. Now, Hazelton, who's the only one out of all the books I've read in the English language that talk about this story, she gives the understanding that Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was a poor orphan. He was somebody of little material wealth, didn't have a father, so Abu Talib didn't give his daughter to Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Right? And if we hear this from an Orientalist for the first time, it makes sense. Right? But these are some of the mistakes that everybody makes when they're studying Seerah. Just like when they say that Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was under the employ of Khadija. Have we heard that one before?
No.
Well, did he work for Khadija? Did she send him on a trade expedition? Shahid?
Yeah, I think so at the time.
Is it a yes or is it a no? Did he work for Khadija, yes or no? Did he go as her?
Yes, he did. Yes, I've heard the stories about that. Yes.
Right, so he went,
Stories.
she employed him and he went and sold goods for her, correct?
Yes.
And he was so Sadiq al-Amīn that she fell in love with him and there was a proposal when he married her, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Incorrect. The second part is correct, but the first part is not correct. Right, now let's leave it at a cliffhanger and then we'll get there. When we will get there, it's only after a few more slides. So let's clarify this story first. Right, as you read your book, you're gonna get the understanding from reading Seerah books that he was under the employ. So even when you read Martin Ling's book, I'm not sure if he mentions, if he clarifies it or not, but they just need to turn around and say he did, he was her agent, X, Y, and Z, and everybody automatically assumes employee, right? So that's what we're going to clarify. That's what these live classes are for. So Abu Talib declined her. It was nothing to do with the fact that Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was poor and he was an orphan. It was because he had already agreed on this marriage with one of the Makhzumis. And it's implied in the sources. He says that, he mentioned something about one noble to another, right? And the Orientalists turn around and say, oh, equals and pairs, and oh, Muhammad, you are a orphan and you are not equal to us. All of this is nonsense, right? He married her to Hubayra ibn Abi Wahab al-Makhzumi because there was like a favor owned. Sometimes like when cousins, they have these understandings. So this was like some kind of a favor owned that he had to do it. And he had already betrothed her over there. So he said no to his nephew. Now, the sources to this are what al-Waqidi via Ibn Sa'ad al-Tabaqat. If you remember back to the first lesson, you can always go back to the very second lesson when we discuss Seerah sources, right? So those lessons are on YouTube as well because I deliberately kept those for everybody to view. In there you can find out Waqidi and what we think of Waqidi. It's a weak story. Right, when they say Waqidi is matruk, abandoned by consensus, that's true when it comes to hadith, but it's not true when it comes to his stories, certain stories in the Seerah, especially the fights, right? The ghazawat, right? So he's actually an expert when it comes to that kind of stuff. So everywhere you will see Waqidi matruk, Waqidi abandoned. It's just people copying and pasting, which I've always said that this is what people do. They never do their own research. They never look deeper and they just copy and paste and, oh yeah, Waqidi is matruk. Okay, well, he is in hadith. Let's clarify that. Let's give us all the information. What does matruk mean here? How is he abandoned? By consensus, by whom and for what reason and in what subject? We cannot throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? But we would say that if only Waqidi has narrated it, then we have to take the story with a pinch of salt, right? So therefore, this story is in the books. If it comes from Waqidi and nowhere else, then we have to think 10 times. But there is a hadith that gives us some more power to this story. So we'll have a look. So that was the first proposal. The second proposal is post-conquest. So this is 8 after Hijri, when they conquered Mecca. Right, so after Fatah Makkah, Hubayra fled to Najran. Hubayra refused to convert. He didn't convert. He refused Islam and fled. These guys fled for their lives, thinking that's it, retribution. So by default, that means it's a divorce. Hani remained with her children. Now Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam proposed to her again. This is what we know, right? Now there's two ways of understanding this. In what capacity did he propose to her? Did he propose to her the same way he proposed to one of the wives of the companions whose husband became a Christian, that and in Abyssinia, that he felt compassion for her and wanted to marry her because they immigrated because of him, and then he had left her alone, and the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam proposed. Was it because he was now looking after his cousin, or was it a genuine feeling of some sort of a romantic love type feeling when you have feelings for someone? Right? I didn't find anything in the books. So we would just leave it there, and we will say that he proposed to her again. She declared respectfully, saying, O Messenger of Allah, I am a mother of orphans. I fear I cannot do justice to your rights. Right? This is in the hadith, Jami' Tirmidhi hadith, and it's Hasan Sahih by some people and Da'if by others. Probably the Da'if by others here would be Albani, Sheikh Albani. We don't care what Albani says. Right? This is Hasan Sahih by Tirmidhi. Ibn Kathir in Al-Badaya wa Nihaya, volume 5, he says those who proposed to but did not marry. So he's talking about additional women that we have stories of that he had proposed to but did not marry. There is another case of another a woman Rasulullah married but didn't consummate, and he divorced her very quickly due to some misunderstanding. And we will look at that in the future, inshallah. The actual hadith, actually this is not the full hadith. I thought I did have the full hadith. But the hadith is, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam proposed to me, but I excused myself and he excused me. Then Allah revealed, O Prophet, verily we have made lawful to you your wives to whom you have given their due, and those whom your right hand possesses, and the daughters of your paternal uncles and paternal aunts, and the daughters of your maternal uncles and maternal aunts who immigrated with you. So the hadith is very long. That's the reason why it's short here. There's a whole Quranic verse here that Fakhita quotes. Right? And it says who immigrated with you. So this verse was revealed afterwards. So when she was asked, did you, like, what's the story? She said, yes, he proposed to me and I refused him because of this reason. And then Allah revealed that he couldn't have married you anyway. Why? Because she did not immigrate with him. Right? So I was not lawful for him because I had not immigrated. I was one of the tulaqa, those pardoned at the conquest. So after the immigration, which was a very hard affair, we looked at Barakah. She, as an old lady, walked. Right? And there's great blessing for those who immigrated. Right? Imam Nawawi in his hadith number 2, is it? Right? It talks about that those who immigrated for a worldly affair, immigrated for a worldly affair, and Rasulullah is saying, and those who immigrated for Allah and His Messenger, immigrated for Allah and His Messenger. Right? So there was only one immigration, and after this you cannot say immigration. Right? This was the biggest one. There were 2 immigrations to Abyssinia, and then there was the massive one, the be all and end all for everybody. If the Prophet's leaving, everybody has to leave, if you can leave. Right? She didn't leave. Either she couldn't leave or she didn't leave, but she didn't leave. Right? And as a result, in Fatah Makkah, everybody was pardoned. Everybody was pardoned. Right? It's not a case that, she had to be pardoned. She was already a Muslim. But all the people that were enemies to Rasulullah, all of them were pardoned. Allah had, it was a general amnesty. Rasulullah pardoned anybody. He could have taken vengeance, he didn't. Right? So the references are here again, which you can check out. So that's the story about Rasulullah's proposals, 2 proposals to his cousin. Right? These proposals happened the first one happened when he was less than 25, and the second one happened when Fatah Makkah. So this is when they're both older now. They're both old people, in middle age now, and he proposed to her the second time. Okay, so it's pretty exciting when we learn something new. That's like, wow, this is just something amazing that we didn't know. Okay, so now moving on. The chapter normally in all books starts from Rasulullah being the businessman. We mentioned last lesson that he was a shepherd. As he grew older, you naturally try your hand at other things, and Rasulullah gave it a go. He tried his hand at business. Abu Talib gave him the initiative. He said, listen, our situation isn't so good, right? So, your ancestors were great traders, Qusay, Hashim, Abdul Manaf, right? Abdullah, your father as well. Why don't you try your hand at trade like your ancestors? So Ibn Sa'ad in his At-Tabaqat, he mentions Rasulullah engaged in trade sometimes with his own wealth, sometimes with the wealth of others. His own wealth must have been very small. So you normally have a share in a caravan that's going, right? It's like you're investing. You've got some money and you want to invest it somewhere. You invest it somewhere. If you've got, even if you've got like £10, you can invest that, right? So it's something like that, most probably. Ibn Kathir says that he traded occasionally on his own and occasionally in partnership with the wealth of others. Al-Halabi in Insan al-Uyun, he adds that he entered into partnerships, mudaraba, with some of Quraysh. Right? So this partnership, we will discuss this next. These narrations are all weaker, but they're preserved as supplementary details for you because it does mention in the books that he did some sort of trade. Right? The reason you don't hear of it a lot is because the biggest one is when he worked with Khadija. Right? But before this, he had tried his hand. And we have narrations as well in hadith which used with these stories gives strength to these stories. Just like the hadith gave strength to the story of Waqidi, the hadith that I will quote next gives strength to these stories. So one such partner of Rasulullah was Sa'ad ibn Abi as-Sa'ib. He, and this is in Abi Dawood now, this is in Sunan Abi Dawood. He said, I was a partner with the Messenger of Allah before Islam, and he was the best of partners. He neither argued nor deceived. Partners normally fall out very quickly over money. He is saying that I was a partner with him before Islam. Sa'ad ibn Abi as-Sa'ib at that time was a non-Muslim before Islam, and he said he was the best of partners and we never had a fallout. Rasulullah also praised him, and he said Sa'ib was an excellent partner. So if Rasulullah is praising someone, that man must have been, and you can imagine Rasulullah wasn't going to do deals with shady people, right? He'd have to find someone who was close to him in his honesty and in his ethics, work ethic. His best friend was Abu Bakr, very similar in personality, soft-hearted, compassionate, thinking, balanced. So likewise, when he's going to find a business partner, for sure it's going to be someone close to him in ethics. So here, this man also accepted Islam at the conquest of Mecca. He was given extensive wealth after the conquest of Mecca in order to turn his heart to Islam. You'll find out when we get to that part, that how much wealth Rasulullah gave. Not only did he pardon everybody, those same enemies of his, he gave them vast wealth. When I say vast, I mean vast. We're talking about a valley. Do you see that valley? Yes. Do you see all those thousands of sheep in there? Yes, it's all yours. And the guy's like, what? He said, yes, it's all yours. So that's the kind of wealth he gave them to turn their hearts. Right? And even in the early period, zakat money was used to turn the hearts of the people to Islam. And Abu Bakr changed it afterwards, that after this day, there's no giving zakat to turn people's heart towards Islam. So today we cannot use zakat money because zakat has conditions. There's like they mention in the Quran, wal fuqara wal masakin was sabil, and people like that. And the turning of the hearts no longer applies due to the fact that that period has now passed. So Rasulullah did this, and this was his first business partner. Now, a few terminologies because they're going to come into play afterwards. Mudaraba, what is mudaraba? Mudaraba is a classic Islamic contract of profit sharing. So it's like being a silent partner or investing money and doing half of the work, coming to an agreement, whatever it may be, 50-50, 70-30, 80-20, and saying, listen, do we agree on this together? Yes. Is it fair? Well, it doesn't seem 50-50, but you're not really doing all the work, so it's like 70-30. Okay, we'll agree. Right? As long as it's agreed and it's a profit sharing, it's known as mudaraba. One party provides the capital, mal, the other provides the labor, travel, management, and the amal, the work. Right? So the profits are shared according to a pre-agreed ratio. Rasulullah is described as being the working partner in such contracts, reflecting his reputation for honesty and skill. Right? So it's very easy to provide the money, but the working part is the hardest, and that's where you have the problems because no one is auditing. Right? You don't have checks and balances. You don't have documents that you've signed. You don't have signatures. So how does you're in the other end of the world, it would seem like Syria was a very, very far away. So how do you have these checks and balances in place? You don't. You just have to trust the person that you're doing business with. His most famous and confirmed mudaraba was with Khadija, salamu alayha, which produced not only financial success but also their marriage. There's your clue now. Shahid, have you got your clue?
Yeah, that was the first kind of like business transaction.
Excellent. So he was never in the employ of her. It was a business transaction of equals. Do you understand what I'm saying now?
Yeah, it was a business transaction, like you said.
Yeah. So we will look at it further as well. So the surprising new business partner, the lady Khadija, salamullah alayha. Let's put this right at the bottom here. Okay, so a number of narrations narrate how the partnership came about. So we have, again, depending on which book you're going to read or who's teaching you the Seerah, there are a number of narrations, right? Someone will just mention one, somebody will mention the other, somebody will mention both. I'll just give it to you now that there are a number of narrations, and we will briefly touch on them. So Abu Talib, one narration is that Abu Talib suggested that he became a business partner, right? Abu Talib said, listen, everybody will trust you. You are the grandson of Abdul Muttalib. You are aristocratic. You are my nephew. Everybody in the whole village knew Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam who he was. Yes, he was the orphan. They would say it in a the orphan boy, right? Not in a bad way they would say it, but they all knew he was an orphan, right? And in a society like that, they really value having a lot of siblings and having strong parents, right? So he was an orphan, but he was also the grandson of Abu Talib, Abdul Muttalib, right? So that held him in good stead. Yes, he was poor. He didn't have a father to protect him, but he had Abu Talib, who was the de facto chief of Quraysh after Abdul Muttalib, right? So that held him in good light, good stead, plus his own personality. He was known throughout to be honest, trustworthy, noble, and you name it, and he had it, right? So either Khadija could have proposed to him herself, as one narration goes, or Abu Talib suggested, why don't you go and speak to her and become a business partner with her? Or he himself made some sort of an engagement with her, arrangement with her, or Abu Talib went to her directly and said, listen, I've come here to speak with you on behalf of my nephew, and these are the terms. My nephew, you know him, he's honest, people are cheating you anyway, so I'm going to give you a deal that you cannot refuse, but in return, I want a very high stake in the Prophet, right? And when she found out it was Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, she agreed. Why? Because she knew that straight away, I'm not going to get done. I'm not going to have anything stolen from me. So even if I come to an agreement where it's 50-50 or 60-40, I'm still making a profit because nothing is being stolen, because I can trust this man, this cousin of mine. A narration also, okay, so there's also a narration, by the way, that there was a Jew in Mecca, and he, just like we have other narrations that the Christians had a feeling a prophet was nigh, the Jews had a feeling a prophet was nigh. This Jew came to Mecca and he got this feeling that a prophet is nigh. So he couldn't help himself, and he said, listen, O ladies of Quraysh, if the prophet comes and any of you is able to marry him, then do so. You'll be of the lucky ones, right? So all the women laughed, and they said, oh, shoo, go away. What are you talking about? What is this? Who are you? Right? So they shooed him away. But Khadija, this sat in her head. These words were very powerful and they took root in her head. So can we say that, did she see signs in him that maybe he was a prophet? We have narrations that many people saw signs in him that he was a prophet, right? I don't know the answer, but it's tied to this story, so maybe she did. But we do know that in one narration she approached him, and in another he did, right? And Another narration mentions Abu Talib telling the Prophet ﷺ, yeah, so we've dealt with this. I was thinking about another story, but I'm not going to add it now. We'll add it when the time comes, inshallah, next lesson. So they agreed on a contract. Khadija and the Rasul ﷺ were not an employer and employee. They were business partners in a contractual business deal. She supplied the goods, he sells them, they share the profit. I should change that right now. Even when I was writing it, I was thinking no pun intended, and I made a mistake writing it. Can you believe? I thought I would write it properly. She offered twice what she would offer others. Abu Talib said, this is the best rizq Allah has given you, i.e., if something comes to you free. In Islam, the idea is that if you're given something for nothing, right, that was a gift from Allah. That's the best that you could hope to achieve. Allah's given it to you without you moving your hands. That's the best rizq for you. So Khatija bint Khuwaylid, I said to you that each time we introduce a new character, I will tell you something about them. So who is she? Khuwaylid is the diminutive of Khalid, right? So Khatija bint Khalid bint Khuwaylid, that was her father's name. If you look at this family tree, from Qusay, it separates, right? So Qusay had Abdul Uzza, Asad, and Khuwaylid, and from Khuwaylid is Khatija, and Qusay had Abdul Manaf, Hashim, Abdul Muttalib, Abdullah, and Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So they're related from like 3-4 cousins removed. They're related to each other, right? So they're cousins, and she was a wealthy widow and a businesswoman to boot in a society where this was very unique. I wouldn't use the word strange because it gives wrong connotations, but this is something that had never happened before, and it just happened by some luck that Allah created. What had happened? First of all, she was the wealthiest of all women ever to have lived in Mecca at that time, and she was also in control of her own money, which was unique. She had also married twice. Now that wasn't a problem for the Qurayshis, right? The stigma that we hold today is something that the Arabs at that time didn't hold. Her first husband was Atiq bin Aidh al-Makhzumi, right? So he was from the Bani Makhzum. Reports say that she had one daughter named Hind from this marriage, and then her second husband was Abu Hala, right? And he was from the Bani Tamim tribe. Reports frequently state 2 children, Hind, a son, and Hala, and Khatija was widowed 2 times, which means that both her husbands died, right? She wasn't divorced. Both of her husbands had died. These names reoccur in classical notices, though chains differ and some details conflict. This is the reason why the Shia are the only ones to believe that these were not her children and she had not married before, and it was actually her sister, I think it was Hala, her sister, that these children belonged to and who was widowed, right? So they believe Khatija was a virgin who had never married before, but the Sunni sources, we say she was married twice before and she was widowed. How did she come across this incredible wealth then? Well, this is the luck part. Her husband, her second husband, he had nobody to leave the wealth to, right? So all of the wealth by default went to a woman, went to her, and she was very wise with the money, and she started to invest the money, and she became richer off that money. Rich to start with. Her father was a businessman, so she was a very aristocratic lady. So this is all we're going to talk about her at the moment. When we discuss the marriage, we'll talk more about her. So Maysara sounds like a female name, but it's a male name, right? He was the manservant of Khatija. Now here's another thing that we need to take into note. We've all heard that Maysara was sent with Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam to report back to Khatija to see if he was doing any underhand dealing or could he be trustworthy, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so from what we've just read here, and the fact that she knew him to be the most honest and trustworthy and noble people of Mecca, it's hardly true to say that Maysara was sent for that purpose. right? That's a complete fabrication. Maysara was sent to assist. Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is arranging everything. She needs one of her own people there. That's the bridge between her and Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he went to assist Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and to keep an eye on the young Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam to report back how experienced he was in business. So he wasn't a spy to see could he be trusted. Basically, she's thinking, I'm sending somebody who I trust. He has little business experience, but I'm sending him because I trust him. So I just want my servant to report back to me. How is he as a businessman? Does he have that business talent? You know, can we carry on using him? You know, yes, he's honest. You know, 1,000 questions go through a person's head. The simplest here would be, I do trust him. I can carry on using him. There's barakah using him because people are not going to cheat me. But I want to know, I'm curious. How is he at business as well? Is he good at business as well? Right? So it's simple. It's a simple explanation. Maysara came away very impressed with the young man's conduct and ethics. This is for the next lesson, inshallah. Right, now I'm going to move on to something that's very important that people don't think about. Right, we've extensively looked at trade. Right, we've done the subject to death. Okay, Halima. Yeah, it's best for you not to message me privately. It's best for you to message in the class, Halima. Okay. So, and we looked at, you know, the archaeology, and again, it's going to come into play now, but now I want you to think along another way, right? We knew the travel route. We know how difficult it is to travel. We saw the pictures, we saw the archaeology, we saw the ruins, we saw everything. But now I want you to put yourself into the shoes of a traveler, what it actually means to travel, right? So just before that, one slide here, so the Arabs used to say, and the scholars of hadith and adab quote, travel reveals a man, right? So if you want to know about somebody, just travel with them, right? You know, traveling brings out the best and the worst in people, because you're put through hardships, and then the people are tested and you can see what their mettle is about, right? So because in travel one cannot hide his temper, patience, generosity or honesty. There is also a narration attributed to Umar ibn al-Khattab, you do not truly know a man until you have dealt with him in money or shared travel with him or lived with him, right? So this is reported here. Prayer and worship can show you someone's outward religiosity. But travel exposes manners, patience, truthfulness, generosity, qualities that everyday encounters might not reveal. Hence the advice to know someone deeply, see how they behave in hardship, money and companionship. So that's why also Maysara is going. Maysara went to help Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and he saw the true character of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and he came away and he reported additional information to her which made her desire to marry Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And that's for next lesson, right? So now let's look at how trade actually worked. This is something that's very interesting and complex, and a subject that I love, as you all know. So how were trade journeys organized, and what were the difficulties involved? No Seerah book will mention this. No Seerah book written by a Muslim will mention this, right? Hazelton does mention it, which is what spurred me to look into it more and present what I'm presenting today, right? This is the reason why I like Hazelton's book, because sometimes Orientalists, they bring in perspectives that Muslims sadly don't, right? I've mentioned this before, that my best Seerah book of all time is written by an Orientalist, right? And Orientalists sometimes, because they're professional writers, some of them are professional writers, so they can put mind to paper, emotions to paper, like a Muslim who has the emotion, but he's not the writer, would never be able to put, right? So this is the reason why I say, when it comes to Seerah, read widely and then join all the evidences together for yourself, and then make your own Seerah in your own self, right? Because everybody has their own version of the Seerah, and nobody can say it's wrong or right. It's their expression of their love for Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. They will join those dots that mean the most to them. Right? So why is my seerah like this? Because these dots mean the most to me. Why is somebody else's seerah on a different style? Because those dots mean the most to them. So read widely and then make your own understanding of the seerah based on all of those sources. Right? So Quraysh in Mecca, now this is very important. They cannot mess this up. Why? Because Quraysh lived in an arid land with no rivers, little agriculture. Survival depended on importing food and exporting food. There's nothing for them to eat. They either go back to being goat herders, or they have a very fine-tuned system in place. And it's so easy for that fine balance to be put off balance. And if it is put off balance, you starve. Right? So they had this under lock. This is why I said that when we were looking at the other empires, that nobody could just stand up and say, I'm going trading. I'm going trading. Try to set up a stall in your own town on the street. You will not get a license. You can't just get a stall out and say, I'm going to trade. The council will come and pick up your stuff and confiscate it of you. They'll probably even fine you. Right? So you cannot just say, even today, you can't just decide to trade anywhere. Oh, I'm going to put a stall up in a car park or on a street corner, or I'm going to, I want to buy this shop. Okay, then some shops you need a license, right? Some shop you need training. You need health and safety training. You need to be a trained chef, or you need to be trained in what you're doing, right? So you can't even today just start a trade. Back then, you couldn't just load up a camel or a donkey and say, right, let's go to Syria, let's go to Yemen, or let's go to the other village. Yes, you may be able to go to the other village, no problem, but you're not crossing empires for various reasons, right? So we're just looking at some of them now, and maybe at the end, I'll just pad it in a bit more by myself. So caravans were the backbone of the economy, lifelines that sustained families, clans, and the city's role as a commercial hub. Journeys were seasonal. We have the summer and the winter journey, which we've mentioned. It's in the Quran. We know this. Not casual ventures. They were multi-month operations demanding planning, finance, diplomacy, and security arrangements. This is what we need to look at now, right? So this, are you with me so far, Shahid?
Yes, following that, yeah.
Right, so follow this one now, right? So this is how it starts now. So you have a caravan leader. So yes, you've got the goods, they're on one side now. Now you need to arrange a caravan. And you were not going to send 3 caravans all the way to Syria, right? For market factors, everybody knows that, right? So you have a caravan leader, he's Amir al-Kafila. He commanded the entire expedition. He was responsible for the routes, negotiations, and the discipline, right? So you have a camel train of over 1,000 camels. This man's responsible for it. Many things can go wrong. People can fight. People can kill each other. He's responsible. He has to deal justice there and then. He has to make sure there's peace. He has to make sure that nothing is short on that camel when it comes to security, food, goods, or the camels, like you're not just deliberately taking along a camel that's half dead, right? So this is a very serious role. The investors or the house principals are wealthy families like Khadija, they provided the capital or the stock, hiring agents to trade on their behalf. That would be Rasul. The agents, the waqala, the wakil, that would be Rasul who executed the deals and handled the negotiations en route and at the other side, right? So you have the investors, they've invested and they trust everything on you. Now everything goes down the chain. Every chain in the link has to rely on each other. Otherwise, if one chain breaks, the whole enterprise is finished. Then you have servants and assistants who ensured the traders' needs were met and reported back. You had security and scouts, armed guards and outriders, kept watch by day and night. You had specialist camel handlers. Nobody thinks about this, right? You need to take along those guys that handle animals. Water carriers, scribes, and interpreters. You need to Be allied with the tribes that you are passing through their territory. Crucial for safe passage across tribal lands, alliances were constantly negotiated, breaking down, renegotiated, right? And this is why Quraysh was unable to trade in the early period. And when everything broke down, Qusay appeared, and Qusay made these deals, right? He went to the Roman Empire, he made a deal. He sent his son to the Persians, he sent his other son to Yemen, he sent another one to Aksum, and they remade these brand new deals. And then on the way back, every single, now you've got a piece of paper, vellum back then, or you've got a tablet. It was not a tablet, it was vellum by that time, right? You've got a signature, you've got a seal from a king or a governor. Now you go to the tribes in the middle and you say, listen, we're going to start trade. So don't attack us. Don't loot us. Here is the seal by the governor of Syria or the king himself or the emperor, right? I've got allowances to go into his country now, right? So if you just work with us, we're all going to benefit, right? And then they would say, okay, fine. We will not loot you, but every time you pass through our territory, you're going to give us 10% of the profit, or you're going to give us a tax or a fee. So now Hashim is making these deals on the way back to Mecca, right? Hashim made them, and also Abdul Manaf, and also especially Qusay made them, right? So this is how trading starts, right? And it's subhanallah, yani after 2,000 years or 3,000 years of trading in the hands of empires and in the hands of like powerful tribal confederations in Arabia aligned with the powers, right? It all broke down, and Quraysh, a non-entity, Allah allowed them to do this. So when you see what's going to happen today, you realize even more how Allah favored them. So financing the caravan, I'm sure there's a spelling mistake in there somewhere, financing. Is that right? Okay. So the caravan, you don't have your own camels. You have to hire the camels. You have to pay the handlers, right? So the mudaraba, and then there's a qiraat. The investors supplied capital or goods. Traders managed them. Profits were split at agreed ratios. Shared ventures. One caravan would carry dozens of micro stakes from multiple families to spread risk. So once you've hired those camels, because they're not yours, you now load that camel, or you have 5 camels, and you are not the only one who's got all of your goods on that camel. There could be a house with a micro stake. Like I told you, Rasulullah probably had, let's say he had £100, right? Equivalent of money. And he would invest that. He would say, listen, I'm going to give you these camel hides, leather hides, and I want you to sell them for me, right? And what's your fee, right? Or 50-50 or something like this, right? So likewise, the same thing happened here. You had micro stakes from multiple families to spread risk. Currencies, so you needed to have different currencies, right? So there was the silver dirham, right? You could get by using Persian currency or by using Byzantium currency. Those were the main 2 currencies, but you needed to have them, because don't forget, not everybody traded in a currency. A lot of it was barter trade as well, especially when it's village to village and small scale, right? So the Byzantium gold solidi, the Persian drachm circulated alongside barter. Credit instruments, early IOU notes used amongst trusted merchants, right? So, I'm going to take your goods back. Right? This, we all know how IOUs work, right? Risk pooling. There was no insurance. So there's no, today you take out insurance, right? As collateral. There was no insurance back then. Safety relied on your caravan size, your alliance, and the clan guarantees. What were the goods that were carried? Right? This is, we didn't touch upon this because I wanted to do something, but I realized that we had done this subject so much that I didn't want to bore you lot anymore. Maybe myself, I'll indulge myself and do a service and do more on Meccan trade. But I remember telling you lot that I didn't want to do it for your sakes, right? So we need to know this. And why another reason we need to know this is because I told you one of the most famous Orientalists of she died a decade ago, 2015 I think it was, Patricia Crone. She's totally rubbished Arabian trade, and she's very influential, right? She was probably the last of the true Orientalists. After her, now people have started changing. The narrative, they're starting to soften now, right? It's not true Orientalism as it was back then, whereas you had a skewed hypothesis which you then tried to prove at all costs, right? So she has totally rubbished the trade, but she did mention a few of the things that if they did trade, what they would have traded on. And she also said that it was possible that the Meccans traded in leather, and the leather went to the Roman army specifically. Why? Because the Roman army needed huge supplies of leather, right? And many people were involved in it, and the Meccans could have done that as well. Allahu Alam, we don't have much information, but the reason she's rubbished the trade is because Mecca doesn't sit directly on the trade route. It sits up onto the side. And if you look at Mecca, it doesn't look like the trading cities we showed you in the past. Jerash, Kerak, Tadmor, which is Palmyra, Bosra, right? Even up in the northern Arabia, places like Al-Ula, Didan, Tabuk. Mecca doesn't look like any trading city in history. So that's why she said, there was no trade. But I'm saying that there was trade, but it wasn't on the same scale as the truly international trade that was going on. These cities were there for 1,000 years, 2,000 years. Massive stopovers, caravanserais and everything like that. Quraysh didn't do trade at that time. So when Quraysh did trade, it was filling the gap, and it made the Quraysh rich. Quraysh wasn't a center of trade as such. Yes, people, every city becomes a center of trade, a hub of trade for what's around it. But nobody would say, okay, this is a staging post on the Grand Trunk Road that goes north to south, the King's Road that goes north to south on the trade route. It wasn't, right? So what were they trading in? They were trading in leather, tanned hides, and simple textiles, right? Not frankincense. If it was on a small scale. The frankincense went past them by probably, God knows, 50 to 100 kilometers, and that trade would bypass Mecca, right? As in that it wasn't a staging post where you'd sell your goods and then somebody else would take them forward. No, Mecca was a tiny place back then, right? Remember, it was just a sanctuary with tents around it. Dates and raisins, perfume bases, musk, ambergris, myrrh on a small scale, handicrafts and animal byproducts. This was Mecca's trade. So this is outbound from Mecca, and coming back from Syria was wheat and barley, which was the lifeline for Quraysh. Also, the breadbasket of Mecca was Ta'if. Olive oil and wine before Islam for re-export, luxury clothes, Byzantium silks and linens, weapons, metal goods and colored dyes. Margins were highest on scarce staples and prestige imports at pilgrimage season. So preparations before the departure. So before you even depart, months before, you send letters of introduction to Syrian brokers and city officials. These are on the borderlands, right? Because you will not be allowed deep into the territory, right? The last thing a king wants is for a band of foreigners numbering over 1,000, fully armed, right, with money as well, to come into the country, come into the territory, and God knows what they can do, right? So they don't want foreigners into their country. This is the reason why up till very late, traders, even with the British, when the British went to the colonies which they colonized later through treachery, when they went to trade, they would have factories. I mentioned this to you. They would call them factories, which were warehouses where they could, on the borders of the lands or on the beaches. Calcutta is a famous one. Mumbai is another one. Panipat, or there's a few on the southwest coast of India. That's the furthest they could get to. Then there were middlemen, Indians, brokers inside, Muslims and Hindus, mostly Muslims, that were doing the trade on their behalf, taking it forward, but not on their behalf. They would buy it off them, and they would give the Brits what the Brits needed, and the Brits would take it back to England, and the Brits would give them what they needed, and they would take it into the hinterland, the English were not allowed into the hinterland in the early period. Likewise with the Persians would offload at border towns. Like the town of Jerash, I told you to look up Jerash, right? Jerash is a beautiful example of a Roman trading town, right? But it's not on the north-south road. It bypasses the north-south road by about 100 kilometers, right? Kerak is probably the closest, and that's about 100 kilometers. But that was probably servicing other trade lines, right? Probably the east-west trade between the Romans and the Persians, and those coming in from South Arabia, Southeast Arabia. There's a secondary route as well, right? Through a Jawf. So, so, you would sell your goods to them, and then they would take your goods into the hinterland. So letters of introduction to Syrian brokers and city officials, safe conduct pledges, agreements with desert tribes to ensure water, access and safe passage, permits and toll receipts necessary to enter souks or pass checkpoints often required payment of customs. Embassy gifts offered to tribal chiefs or governors as part of diplomacy. Provisioning animals fed and watered, skins filled, fodder packed, spare equipment loaded. You see now all of a sudden how difficult it is to arrange a trade. Then you had security risks. So you had the caravans needed to be massive, right? Massive. So if your numbers are small, you can see the end and the beginning of it. But the problem is now people can attack you. If your numbers are very large, you can't see what's happening at the end. You can't see what's happening in the middle, and you can't see what's happening at the front. But your numbers are so large that others would become intimidated, saying, you know what, there's a lot of them here. So strength in numbers, large convoys deterred raiders. You had scouts. These were sent ahead, sometimes days ahead, to watch for ambushes, check for wells, and assess road conditions. Then you had night security, camps formed in circles, camels hobbled, which means you tie one of their legs up so that they can't wander off at night time. Guards kept shifts. Conflict protocol. So, they carry silver, cloth or camels as compensation to quickly settle disputes. Sometimes, you'd have to pay off people. Sometimes you'd have to they had this extra surplus to pay off problem makers within their own camp, probably, and any renegades from outside as well. Intelligence, right? So you needed an odd spy or two, right? Which were your scouts. News was shared at wells, alliances, updated scouts, check tribal moods. Do you remember I told you when we read the Thisija, I made the lesson and I pointed to you lot online, and I did mention it in class as well, that one of the first things that Arabs would ask each other when they were crossing the desert, what news? Shu akhbarak, shu akhbarak. Even now, the Saudis say shu akhbarak, and the Syrians say that, right? What news? What news? Right? So before anything else, it also means how are you doing, but tell us, because we need to know straight away what dangers lie ahead. Is there water that way? Have two tribes fought? Are there renegades, armed rebels, raiders, highwaymen? Right? Have the tolls changed positions? Are the toll taxes large going this way by the major powers? So you hear this all the time, right? What news? What news? And when somebody's coming towards you, the traditional method is that they kick up sand with their feet, right? So from a long way away, if you sight somebody and they start to kick up sand, you know that they mean well. It's like them coming to you with their hands in the air saying, we don't mean no trouble. You can see my hands. I'm not going to pull a knife or a gun out. So then you would speak to them, right? Otherwise, strangers coming to you from the desert, all of you would put your hands on your swords, ready for a fight. And a reference of this is made in Thisij's book, right? So intelligence sharing was very important, and it was done by everybody. That's why they say that even in the desert, the news would spread. You think that nobody would know you're traveling in the desert, but believe me, before you probably even knew you were traveling in the desert, the whole desert would know you were traveling in the desert. Because that was one of the most important things, that news had to spread in the desert, right? So now, what about the path to Syria? We saw the towns, the cities, but now we're talking about Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam going, right? So there were actually two paths, but I'm only going to concern myself with the path that I believe that Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam took. And there's a beautiful book that is in print. I should have linked it, but I did remember, but I didn't. But I can do it later, inshallah. That you can read with pictures. This was the path that Rasulullah took when he immigrated, right? And it's a beautiful. Some parts of it I don't like so much because the photography is not panoramic; it's very close up, so you can't get a real understanding of the lay of the land that Rasulullah would have looked at. That's my only gripe with the book. But otherwise, it's a book that shows you in pictures every single path that Rasulullah walked from Mecca to Medina. It's a book well worth having, by the way. So the path was the humidity, by the way, the air is like 18%, right? Humidity. It's so dry that you can't sleep because your sinuses are blocked up, and all day your sinuses stay closed. So this is like the worst month here. After a month, the humidity changes again, and alhamdulillah, it becomes easier to live. Right, so the path, we have Mecca, Yathrib, which is Medina. We're not allowed to call it Yathrib anymore. From Yathrib, it was Khaybar, Tabuk, Basra, or Damascus. Right, Damascus, very, very rare anybody went. They would just stop at Basra, which was at the border of the Roman Empire, and exchange their goods, and that's it. So Yathrib, its main function was food, water, and tribal diplomacy. Khaybar was an oasis, blacksmiths, fodder. The Jews were known for their blacksmith work. Tabuk, it was a plateau, it was a staging post, customs collections, because now you're getting close. You know, the roads tighten now. You've got the King's Road starting. Basra was a Ghassanid town, Byzantine oversight, entry into Levantine markets. Then there was the alternative routes chosen if banditry, feuds, or droughts closed a section, right? We're not looking at those. This is enough. So the travel pace, you travel 25 to 40. I think 40 is pushing it a bit. I would say 30 kilometers a day, depending on the terrain and weather. So what logistics did you need? A camel drinks 20 to 30 liters every few days. Humans need 3 to 5 liters a day minimum in the desert, right? When you're traveling. So you can see before the camel was introduced into Arabia from, some say from Ethiopia in the 3rd or 4th or 5th century, right? People did trade, but it was walking. How much can you carry? How much slower was it? When the camel was introduced, I believe the camel was introduced much earlier, right? But I read a source today, Hazelton mentioned. I don't know where she got a source from, but for me, camels were introduced earlier than that. Domesticated earlier than that as well. Because we have, I even showed you in the beginning, we have rock carvings of camels as well. So, with the camel, you can travel up to 30 kilometers a day. You can carry heavier loads, and you can survive, basically, right? So they had pre-arranged water caches. If you read Thizaj's book, you'll know about this. They knew known oases. So sometimes you have a big oasis, sometimes you have just a rock with a tiny hidden well that only the Bedouin know, and they keep secret, right? And the water tastes absolutely disgusting, but you've got no choice but to fill there and drink there if you know that well as well. There were emergency rationing rules. Tijza mentions that in his book as well. Sometimes you have to live on a few dates a day. Sometimes you have to live on a few dates. Sometimes you have to live on like a cup of water a day or something like this, right? And you've seen it in the movies when they're in the desert and everything. And Tizja mentions it in his book as well. You needed fodder, you needed barley, dry grasses, grazing arrangements near camp stops. You can't just graze anywhere in the desert. Those lands belong to people. Load planning. Each camel carries a maximum of 150 kg. And the more it carries, the less it's going to travel. Some designated only for water or food. So you had camels, probably hundreds, just designated to carry water skins. Those water skins, I even showed you pictures of them last time. They would be closed off, right? The water would be rank tasting inside those skins because it would be a skin of a goat or a skin of something, a sheep or something like that. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Alex, thanks for joining. even if it's in passing, I always appreciate. And once you drink directly from the mouth of that, it stinks, right? The water probably comes out brackish, and they also sweat, so they're not watertight. You need to tighten them. They leak. So as the days go by, you'll start to see that some of your water skins start to get skinnier and skinnier, right? Your fat goat is no longer fat, but it looks depleted and dehydrated, right? Except that you can't see any ribs now. So what was the daily routine like on the trail? So everybody woke up pre-dawn, right? So this is rise prayers, dismantle camp for Muslims and non-Muslims. You know, even the Qurayshis would get up, and the first thing they do is they'd pray. Remember in the Seerah we read that when they went on a journey, they would touch their idol, stroke their idol and go and come back and stroke their idol and come back in. So likewise, you can imagine they would get up and pray to their God. The Muslims would do their prayer after Islam, and then you'd march in the early hours. So you'd get up for Fajr. Literally, you'd start marching at the crack of dawn because it's cool, and you can only do it till about 11 o'clock. After that, it gets too hot. So this is your long push now before heat. Short halts every 2 hours. By midday, you rest. So from, I would say, 12 o'clock till about 3 or 4 o'clock, you would do nothing, right? And I saw a beautiful short YouTube clip on why Bedouins don't move, right? Because if you've ever lived in a hot country, just movement will make you sweat, right? So literally, like in Saudi, if I'm sitting there, right, and you raise your hands to make dua, and depending on the wordings of your dua, your emotions change, and depending on your emotional change, I swear to God, you start sweating. Because don't forget, you're already at the threshold. You're already living in 40 degrees. You're already overheating. So it doesn't take much for your body to then heat a bit more, enough for you to sweat more. Whereas if you're, you know, in a cool place, it doesn't really make a difference. So simple movements would make you sweat, would make you overheat. So even thinking, I swear to you, even thinking would make you sweat. Right? So you have to just don't do nothing. You can't do anything, or you bear it, basically. And it's really good. I'll try to find that for you. It's powerful, very powerful. It's worth listening to. And you have to completely cover yourself. You get sunburnt very quickly, right? You need to, and the dust gets into your nose, your eyes, your ears. You know, men and women have to completely cover. The camel is beautifully made for the desert. It's got long eyelashes, protection from the dust and from the sun's glare. It's got padded feet that allow it to walk on the sand. You have a midday siesta. You rest under shade. You feed the animals lightly. Then you have a late afternoon march. That would probably be at 4 o'clock. Resumed until late afternoon. So you do that another 2 hours until 6 o'clock. After dark, you don't travel because it's dangerous. Why? Because of rocks, scorpions, camel spiders, snakes, and all sorts of stuff. Evening encampment, camels watered and tethered, guards rotate, trade stories, news with other travelers. There's no fridge, there's no microwave. So you need to cook a fresh meal. So now, probably after the whole day, this is your only meal, right? So if you read Tizijah, you're so tired, you're hot, your water is rationed, so you can't just start chugging down water, right? It's not, you know, unless it's your own, and even then you wouldn't be so silly to do that. You'd ration your water. Now you have to wait. So you have duties. Who's going to pitch tent? Who's going to clear the place? Who's going to feed the camels? Who's going to collect the firewood? Who's going to light the fire? Who's going to cook? Who's going to kill the animal fresh? Right? So it's a massive enterprise. And then you've got to wait 2 hours until they've cooked that food before you get to eat. And it's very dark now. Your only light is the light by the fire. Then you go to sleep, because very early you're up again, and all you're going to eat in the morning is the leftovers of last night's food, right? And if you're not careful, as Tizijah mentioned, a fox is going to come and take it. A fox came and took their food, and they tracked the fox. The fox had hidden the food in its hiding place, right? And they stole it back from the fox so they could eat it. And it's been in the fox's mouth with the fox's saliva, for probably a mile or two, right? That's the reality of life over there. This is in the 20th century, by the way, right? So God's raw trade stories news. Disciplined leader enforces prayer halts, rationing, and dispute settlement. Then we have the border politics, right? So there are no fixed borders, they move. There are zones of influence. We mentioned this, right? The Ghassanids, the Byzantines, tribes. The Ghassanid Arab clans of Byzantium acted as gatekeepers. You got to pay them a tax. You either offload your goods there and come back, or you want to go forward, you pay them, and then you got to pay probably again when you get to the official Roman toll place, right? So customs and dues, taxed imports, exports, receipts stamped, risk of double tax, losing a receipt means paying twice, diplomatic gifts, fine leather, perfumes, oils, cloths, securing goodwill, and smoothing passage. So, you know, your chief goes and meets their chief, and they have tea. No, well, at that time there was no tea, there was no coffee. You probably have camel's milk together, or water, or wine, and give him a gift. And, you know, he'll kind of laugh and say, Habibi, what can I do for you? And you say, listen, I want to pass. He says, it's okay, no problem, you can pass. I'll tell my gatekeepers, just pay your tax on your way out, please. Stuff like that. So then arrival in Syria, Bosra. Markets controlled by governors, market inspectors, entry required paying customs, hiring brokers, necessary to navigate local standards, weights and prices, dealing practices, samples tested, scales monitored, disputes settled by witnesses, storage. These are storage warehouses. You'd hire them, right? You could hire them temporarily, you could hire them for the year, right? If you're very rich, you'd hire them permanently. You'd buy your own, right? We're talking about Banu Umayyah now, who also had villages in Syria. They owned the tax from all of those villages, right? They offered storerooms with locks and signed receipts, sell parts of the stock to cover cost, hold luxury goods for peak festival sales. Contracts were written in Arabic, sometimes bilingual with Greek or Aramaic. Arbitration, disputes taken to market inspectors, brokers, or tribal guarantors. All of this wastes time. Merchants who cheated lost credit and were excluded from the next caravan. Enforcement, social boycott was stronger than physical enforcement. Threats and hazards. Banditry, worst in the narrow wadis, because they can come to you from the mountains, right? You are in a valley and they can descend upon you, right? Countered by convoy size, guides and payments. If you read the wars with the Wahhabis, the early wars with the Wahhabis and the armies sent by the Ottomans, I think under the governor of Muhammad Ali Pasha of Egypt, they were ambushed by the Najdis, right? In one such valley. And this is only 200 years ago, 253, something like that years ago. So, so if it's a good idea to juxtapose this route over Google Earth and see the route, and you'll see where the valleys occur and the mountains next to it, and how, you know, you need to know your way. Otherwise, if you run the wrong way, you're lost and it's all over. You're dead. And you need to know how to navigate those mountains. They're like large rocks. I say mountain, but they're like huge rocky terrain, right? And then it stops, and then you have sand, and it starts again, and it goes on for miles and miles and miles. And if you take a wrong turn and go through a valley and you don't know your way, that's it, you're lost. So dry wells could mean death. Caravans had to have contingency routes. Sudden feuds or new governors could close a road. Caravans had to adapt fast. Price fluctuations, sudden surpluses or shortages forced quick decisions to sell early or hoard. Right? Return and profit settlement, timing, staggered departures to avoid flooding the Meccan market on your way back. Profit division, cost deducted first, tolls, wages, losses. Mudaraba, split, often 50-50, sometimes 1/3, 2/3, depending on risk. Goods in kind, some investors received goods instead of cash. Record keeping, contracts and ledgers stored for future journeys. Right? So after all of this, right, now you can understand why Khadija Kubra Salamul Alayha was an extraordinary woman. For a woman to be able to manage all of this and find people to do all of this is absolutely amazing. right? In a society where women had no rights, no power, no wealth. So she was clever because she diversified her wealth in multiple caravans. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket after what you've just heard, right? She obviously, we had the north and the south caravan. She sent Maysara to observe and report. Generosity, paid above contract wages. You want someone's loyalty, don't pay them the market wage, pay above. For honesty and success. Reputation, her fairness ensured her caravans faced fewer obstacles. Wisdom, she recognized the Rasul's honesty and reliability, hired him, then later married him. That sounds nice, isn't it? Hired him and then later married him, subhanAllah. How her luck was better than every other woman. So the sources, if you want to read further, read Ibn Hisham, Imam Tabari, Ibn Sa'ad, his Tabaqat. Robert Hoyland, I recommended you this book. A lot of the earlier lessons we used him, Arabia and the Arabs. Michael Lecter on Trade and Tribal Politics. I'm going to give you more books afterwards, by the way. We still need to talk a bit more. Patricia Crone, Meccan Trade and the Rise of Islam. Read it, but read it with a large pinch of Himalayan salt. This woman talks a lot of nonsense, by the way, right? But if you want to know the kind of nonsense that Orientalists used to spew out, read her, right? Or in fact, don't read her if you're weak-minded, actually. Leslie Hazelton, she's a Jewish atheist. She wrote the Seerah, the first Muslim, right? And the reason I've included it here is because she is the only one I've seen in any Seerah book that talks something about what a trade journey is like, which made me then go and do this, right? So, if only to see how she's not an Orientalist, but to see how non-Muslims think, read her book. I actually like her book, but there's a lot of wrong in that book as well. But I like the perspective she brings in, and we discussed the perspectives earlier on as well. So the route now. So what was the route that Rasul took himself? This should interest us, right? This should interest us and people who got money. If you've got a lot of wealth, hire a caravan train, man. You only, in today's age, it's safe. You only need 2-3 caravans and do it. Or get into a car and do it. Or bike ride, like my friend who bike rided from Mecca to Medina, right? And do the route. The bike route is obviously the metalled road. It's not it's not the old road, but we do know where the old road is now. Hike it, man. Hike it. Or at the very least, get into a car and see the cities. Go and look at the archaeological remnants of those cities and connect with your Prophet ﷺ. There's a physical connecting through distance and time, and there's a spiritual connection which is outside of time. We all have the spiritual connection, but none of us have the physical connection because we're not there. And even if you're in Mecca, Mecca's brand new now. The mountains are old, there's a physical connection, but the Haram is brand new. Even the Kaaba was built afterwards again, and they just built it again a couple of years ago. 2007 I think they built it, or 97 or 2007 they completely built it again. But if you're going past these ancient stations that still exist, you're connecting with archaeology, remnants, relics that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, guaranteed more or less he saw them, right? So let's have a look at those now. So the route is Mecca to Medina, Khaybar, Wadi al-Qura, which is Al-Ula. We looked at Didan. I found these places fascinating. Al-Hijr, which is Hegra, Madain Saleh, known as the people of Thamud. Tabuk, Aqaba, Ma'an. So from Aqaba, it's Jordan now, right? So Ma'an is a city in Jordan. It still exists. Now the Nabatean, the Roman road starts, right? Petra is actually before this. Petra region is before Ma'an. It's probably the same administrative zone back in the past. Ash-Shawkak and Kerak plateau. Madaba, which is it's Amman, you can say, right? Philadelphia back then. And then Hauran, Basalt Plain, and then on to Syria. I was surprised that Jerash isn't here. But then I found out while doing my research that Jerash is actually off this road. But Jerash is a beautiful example of a Roman town if you want to look at it. This aligns with the long north-south road later formalized for Hajj from Damascus to Medina, whose major stations included the same stations, right? And then with the Roman via Triana Nova from Aqaba to Basra, right? So now let's have a little bit of a deeper look into this road. So the distance from Mecca to Yathrib is around 340 kilometers. Are you lot with me so far?
Yes.
Yeah, still here.
Yeah, I think oh, thank God you're here, Halima. I thought you'd run away. Right? So the landscape. So the caravan, so from, right. So it required 10 to 14 days by camel caravan. If you did it alone, like the companions did, in their desperation to leave Mecca with just one camel, they could do it in 10 days. But if you're fully loaded with a caravan train, you're looking at 2 weeks. The terrain is harsh, desert, broken by occasional wells and thorn acacias. Volcanic black rock, which I showed you, Google Earth will show you that, dominates the landscape. So it's not desert like you thought. Remember back to the earlier lessons. What is seen upon approach, lush date groves. And even today, if you are driving to Medina, this is exactly what you will see. You will see lush date groves. Oh, it's beautiful, subhanallah. And villages of Yathrib. Yathrib was a series of settlements. It wasn't a clear demarcated city like Mecca was, or any of the other cities were. It was just a series of villages. And we'll look at Yathrib more when we get to Medina, inshallah. Is built around fertile volcanic soil and underwater water. You can clearly see that volcanic soil and the black lava in and around Mecca, Medina to this day. And it has water, it's an oasis, that's why you have the greenery there. Archaeology, ancient irrigation ditches, stone foundations and remains of Jewish and Arab tribal settlements. Medina was not just a rest stop but a provisioning hub. You need to resupply yourself. It was known for its agricultural surplus. From Medina to Khaybar, Yathrib, I'm just saying Yathrib because we're talking pre-Islam. Yathrib to Khaybar, landscape, the caravan crosses stretches of Harra. So now you have intense lava fields and you will see them when you pass there. You can look in Google Earth, right? It's horrible. This is the reason why you can't invade Medina. You have to come from one side. And if you protect that one side, ain't nobody getting in. This is what happened in the Battle of the Ditch, which we will look at when we get there as well, inshallah. So the caravan stretches, you have the lava flows. I encourage all of you to go onto Google Earth and zoom in to Medina now to see what we're talking about, right? With jagged black stone moving towards the Khaybar oasis. So again, you have beautiful pockets of greenery, right? It's absolutely stunning. All of a sudden in the desert, you have these palm trees and like, I'm talking like hundreds of thousands of them. Back then, and you can still see signs of these. You can YouTube this and you can still see these fortresses, right? You see Jewish fortresses perched on high rocky outcrops. So Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam would have passed this and then he would have seen these fortresses perched on rocky outcrops guarding vast palm groves, right? The Arabs and the Jews owned, and especially the Jews, they owned vast tracts of land over there, right? And it all came into the power of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam afterwards, and there was the Sunni Shia split on this, and we will look at that when we get there, inshallah. Camels watered at wells, merchants replenished dates. Archaeology, Khaybar's ruined forts still dominate the oasis. Go onto YouTube, right? It's sad that, because of the Wahhabi business, there was no tourism, there was nothing. Only now they're starting to do this. But still, these places are still, Khaybar is still pretty much closed off. Why? Because it's very famous to do with the land that the Shia believe that should have been given to Fatima to Zahra salamullah alayha. But it was given, Abu Bakr used it as a state land. It went to the state basically. Right? And then that's where the Sunni Shia, they split on that point as well. So because of that, the Shia like to go to Khaybar and see that place. And it's fenced off. But if you go to Khaybar, the town that's there, you can see the Jewish forts and wars in the Seerah are mentioned. Battles were fought in this area. You can even see the ruins of these battles, right? So it's, if you can go, you go. I never went because I didn't want to leave Medina every time I went. But I knew that these places were close by, especially Madain Saleh. But I just never had the heart to leave Medina to go there. Right now, I wish I would have done, especially now that I'm teaching the Seerah. But at that time when I was there, I didn't. Terraces, dams, and irrigation channels reveal advanced farming. So the Arabs were farmers over there, whereas the Meccans were traders or semi-Bedouin. Cultural note, Khaybar was famous for its fertile soil. Why? Because where you have volcanic activity, it's constantly churning out fertile black soil, producing some of the best dates of Arabia. By far, I would say Saudi Arabia today has the best dates in the world, even better than the ones coming out of Iraq. A secure stop before pushing into the true northern deserts, allowing caravans to restock fully. So from Khaybar, you went to Wadi al-Qura, which is Al-Ula Didan. We studied these extensively. Again, beautiful. Oh my God. For me, it's the most stunning scenery of Arabia. A long, fertile valley surrounded by sandstone cliffs, 20 kilometers long, right? And you've got vast palm trees in there. It's just like Jannah. You know, to talk about the walled garden, bustans. You know, in Arabia, Rasulullah was in Medina sitting in a garden. Abu Bakr came, Umar came. You know, you get these hadith, right? They're not like English country gardens, which are spectacular and beautiful in their own way. We're talking about Arab-style gardens, which are not as lush, right? But when you're in the desert and then you come into this space of green, and it's cool, and there's water, and there's greenery, it's another feeling altogether. It's beautiful in its own right. So the archaeology, Didan was the capital of an ancient kingdom. We looked at inscriptions in Didanite, Lihyanite, and Minaean scripts cover the rocks. We did this as well. Temples and monument, lion tombs survived. We saw these as well. You could see them today if you go there. There's documentaries in the Arabic language made in Saudi Arabia. There's a archaeologist kind of a guy, and you can see close up, you know, footage of all of these places. So what is seen? Green oasis bustling with villagers, traders, dates, wheat, water. The sandstone cliffs rise dramatically around the fertile core. This was the breadbasket of the northern road. Caravans never bypass Wadi al-Qura. These are some of the set routes, right? Then there was Madain Saleh. Now I'm pretty sure Madain Saleh is before Al-Ula. I don't know, I may be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it is. So around 20 kilometers north of Al-Ula. Okay, so it's north of Al-Ula. Al-Hijr, Al-Higra, right? Hijr means the rock. Madain Saleh, Saleh is the prophet, and Saleh came to the people of Thamud. So this is the famous, the Nabatean graves, over 100 of them. Beautiful, striking, sticking out in the middle of the desert as if made by giants. And I showed you these beautiful pictures in the earlier lessons. So Prophet Muhammad ﷺ passed by these places, right? After revelation, when he found out that this was where the punishment had come down, no doubt there were stories before, but he then in one of the wars, when they passed through, he said, pass through quickly. He didn't even allow water to be taken from the well here. He said, this is a place where God's punishment descended. Don't stop here. He didn't feel comfortable stopping in a place like this. Ever since then, Muslims have been discouraged to go there, right? Which is very funny and strange, because the Saudi government, with its Wahhabi base, is now making a massive modern tourist center there, right? It flies in the face of all the Wahhabi teachings, right? But for someone like ourselves who are Seerah, who are lovers of Rasulullah, and our intention is just to know what the eyes of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, rested upon, to take ibrah, to take lessons from what happened there. You are allowed, in the Sharia, you are allowed to go and have a look, to derive lessons, and then make dua and say, oh Allah, save us from what befell them. Oh Allah, protect us, and don't let our end be like that, right? So you can't just go, let's go tourism, man. No, you have to have a good intention. Otherwise, the Prophet's hadith falls upon you. Don't visit these places. And if you have to pass by swiftly. It's 20 kilometers north of Al-Ula, so the road goes to Al-Ula and here, but it will not stop. You won't see this. It's off the path. In the winter, it's absolutely freezing, by the way. So dozens of monuments, Nabatean tombs carved into sandstone, outcrops glowing gold in the sun, wells and cisterns ensuring permanent water supply. The only reason I didn't put photography is we've done it before and I didn't have the time. It would have taken me ages to put photographs up, but I'm sure all of you should remember this. Today, over 100 rock-cut tombs remain with inscriptions naming Nabatean officials, recognized by UNESCO as Arabia's first World Heritage Site. The necropolis inspired awe and fear. In Islamic memory, Al-Hijr was linked with the punished Thamud people, a central staging post of Nabatean trade before the Roman takeover in 100 something AD. Then from Al-Ula, Tabuk is not far, to Aqaba, which was Ayla, and if you remember some of the trade wars lessons, we mentioned Ayla. Harsh northern Hijaz desert, then descent into the Gulf of Aqaba. What do you see? You see the sparkling waters of the Red Sea Gulf, traders unloading goods at the port. Ancient Ayla, near modern Aqaba, preserved city walls, churches and inscriptions. It was a key port city. The final Arabian stop before entering the Transjordan Plateau. From here, the caravan joined the Via Nova Traina. This is the official Roman-built highway. So now all of a sudden, the Arabs are like, wow, we're on a paved road, right? You know, from traveling on rough desert terrain, rocky terrain, soft terrain, all of a sudden now you've got a Roman road. What did that feel like to the Arabs? Who, you know, these are symbols of power, right? So Aqaba to Ma'an and Petra region. Landscape, the caravan climbed from the Gulf into the stony Transjordan Plateau. Vast desert highlands punctuated by Nabatean cisterns, watch posts, caravanserais. Nearby lay Petra, hidden in sandstone canyons. At that time it was known, it became lost afterwards. Petra's carved treasury, Al-Khazaneh, the monastery, Ad-Dair, temples, colonnaded streets and sophisticated water channels. This marks the beginning of the paved Roman road. Milestones, road stations, mansions. You'd have pickets, probably we would call them turnpikes or but you know, there would probably be just manned posts, right, where you need to just manned by guards, right? So it'd probably be a sense of security there as well. You'd have to kind of go through those tolls. And paved stretches ensured steady movement. Petra, once the Nabatean capital, had declined under Rome but remained symbolically and strategically important. From Ma'an, they went to Shawbak, Karak, Madaba, which is in Amman, the capital today, known as Philadelphia back then. Amman takes its name from the old Ammonite Empire kingdom, which we looked at in one of the very early lessons. Geography, fertile highlands of Moab. See, there you go. Moab and Ammon, and there was a third kingdom as well. I can't remember now. What is seen? Grain fields, vineyards, olive groves, and fortified towns on rocky ridges. At Shawbak and Kerak, later Crusader castles dominate. So the Muslims later saw this. Beneath them lie the Nabatean and Roman remains in Madaba and Amman. Beautiful Christian remains in Amman, by the way, in Madaba. Byzantine mosaic remains. You're going to see the mosaics. And Roman civic buildings survive. The caravan advanced steadily along the Via Nova Traina with milestones and garrisons. This Transjordan plateau provided rich supplies and a secure corridor north. Then, surprise, surprise, I thought it was Jerash, but apparently the road carries on to Karak. Karak sits atop a steep hill in the Moabite plateau commanding the caravan road. It overlooks fertile valleys used for wheat, barley and vineyards. The Via Nova Traina King's Highway ran directly through the Kerak region, making it a natural staging post for caravans. Ancient Moabite occupation attested by inscriptions. In Roman Byzantine times, Kerak was fortified and served as a garrison town along the imperial road. Later centuries saw the construction of the famous Crusader. So the Crusaders also, you know, when they were there, right, they built their Crusader castles, right? Again, magnificent in their own right. The Crusader castles, and they were, to a lesser extent, there were the Ismailis also had their castles. I actually saw one in Syria when I was there, and I had the fortune to completely in the middle of a village, right? Nobody in that village knows what it was. And when I looked everywhere, like I had that place to myself, subhanallah, right? And apparently it was during the Syrian war, I saw a checkpost right by the fortress, and the Russians were there. The Russians had like a checkpost there, but otherwise that nobody knows. In that whole area, it was the Alawi mountains, so even they don't know who it belonged to. But I did some research, and it is possibly an Ismaili mountain castle, right? If you know the Ismailis, they caused a lot of problems for everybody in the early period of Islam. It was an offshoot of Ismailism that ravaged the Hajj, stole the black stone, destroyed Zamzam, destroyed the part of the Kaaba, and stole its riches, killed, massacred the Hujjaj, right? And many such, they were known as the assassins, right? So they were the first suicide killers, not bombers, suicide killers. They would basically assassinate you in full view of everybody, not caring about the repercussions. The guards would grab you and then kill you or sentence you, whatever, but they didn't care, right? And they were the forebears to what today is the Ismaili community, right? So this area in Syria, and this particular group was finally destroyed by the Mongols, right? The Crusaders made agreements with them and alliances, and the Muslims were afraid of them, and it was finally, I think it was the Battle of Angel Ut was the decisive blow for the Mongols. But the Mongols did put end to their tyranny. So the Crusader castles, you can still see them today, built over older foundations. From the caravan road, one would see fortified ridges, terraced farmland, and bustling market activity of the plateau villages. So this is what the Prophet ﷺ was passing through, right? This is what he would have seen. Keret-controlled passage through central Moab. It was a strategic choke point on the journey, ensuring that all trade between Aqaba and Basra passed through its highlands. Guaranteed the Rasul ﷺ would have passed through here then. Then on to Hawran to Basra. Landscape, again, vast black basalt plain of the southern Syrian desert, right? This is the second desert that we told you is in the northern Jordan, southern Syria. But also the edges they're very fertile with wheat and barley. I even showed you pictures of what Syria looks like. Villages built of dark basalt stone, extensive farms, and at last the great city of Basra. Basra preserves a colossal Roman theatre. I showed you this. Baths I showed you, colonnaded streets I showed you, Byzantine, I showed you all of this, and Ghassanid monasteries. In the Prophet's time, it was the seat of the Ghassanid Arab Federati under Byzantium. You know what's very interesting? Basra is in southern Syria, right? This is where, civilized Rome starts, right? Because beyond that, we had the Jordanian desert, and the Jordanians, they were Bedouins, right? Whereas the Syrians are more kind of civilized, for want of a better word. There's a city called, there's a Alawi, on the Alawi coast in Ladaiya. So a lot of these names, by the way, I only discovered this when I went to the museum. Do you remember, Alex, when I posted Allat? Shahid, do you remember?
I do, yeah.
Yeah. Right. So all of these Syrian towns, Homs, Aleppo, Homs, and Hama, and Latakia, they say, these are all Roman names. None of these names are Arab names. They're just Roman names Arabized, right? So Latakia, we say in English Latakia, right? The Arabs themselves say Ladaiye, right? Ladaiye, they pronounce it like that. It's actually a Roman name. The general who took command of that town named it after his mother. So it's Ladaiya Dimar or something, right? So it's named after a woman, that town. So there's another town there, very famous town for the Alawis. It's called Jable, right? And I think I passed Jable. Jable, right? There's a story in during the time of Umar where Umar did something in his sense of justice, but really it backfired for the tribal chief that was involved. Now, there was a lot of racism and social stratification amongst the Arabs in the early period. So when they were becoming Muslim, there was a Ghassanid prince that came, and he was dealt with by a common Medinan Arab, and he felt insulted that he was, this commoner is dealing with him on equal terms or something, and he slapped him, right? As was probably the custom back then, right? Like, how dare you, I am the chief of one of the Ghassanid princes, I am a Ghassanid prince. And Umar found out about this, and Umar, knowing Umar, he said, this demands justice. So what's justice? You slap the prince. So this simple Medinan Muslim Arab slapped the prince. Now the prince couldn't take his pride, right? You've just been slapped in front of all your people. Him and his crew ride out of town back into the north, and I don't think he never became a Muslim. He went as far as Jabal, right? And an Alawi man told me, he said Jabal refers to this prince, this Ghassanid prince, because his name was something Jabala or something like this, right? And I was like, oh my God, so there's the link, right? So the whole town is named after this prince, and his name was in the Seerah. I don't know what his name is, but I'm sure the name Jabala does come to mind, right? And so Ladaiye and Tartus. See, look at these names: Tartus, right? Aleppo, right? Clearly, these are not Arab names. So Syria was Roman, right? So of course the language is going to be Latin would have probably been the liturgical language. Greek was spoken, Arabic was spoken, Aramaic was spoken as well. But all of the towns would have been named after Roman names, and the small villages would have been, Aramaic names and stuff like that. So, so Basra was the provincial capital of Arabia Petraea and the final destination of Quraysh trade caravans. Goods were sold and exchanged here before being carried further to Damascus. So they wouldn't go to Damascus, right? Right? The Romans would not allow armed Bedouin tribes carrying goods like 1,000 camels strong and say, yo, come, you're armed, you're wild, go and wreak havoc in our markets. No. So what would happen is that this is where the trade would happen. Both sides would trade and they would go back, right? They wouldn't allow you in. The Persians wouldn't allow you in. The Indians wouldn't allow you in. Nobody, back then, people never traveled into strangers' lands. This is a very new phenomena. Ibn Battuta and what's his name? Marco Polo, Ibn Battuta, and a few others. They're rare exceptions to the rule. That's the reason why their works are so highly priced today. You'd be killed. You would be killed. We've got stories of armed groups. Like, we're talking armies escaping from another army, enter another territory, and then they get killed. Like Jalaluddin, who was the son of what's his full name? The Khwarazm, where I am now today in Uzbekistan. This was the Khwarazm Empire. You know what? I can't pronounce because my nose is blocked. Khwarazm, right? So it's a Persianite, early Turkic empire here. Very, very big. In 1258, in Otrar, the governor ended up killing 100 convoy strong trade envoy from Genghis Khan, which obviously then spurred him to destroy most of the Muslim world as a result of that silly move, right? He was chased into the Caspian, ultimately caught and killed on an island. His son Jalaluddin Khwarazmi made it as far as India, and the Mongols pursued him and they fought, and his army was massacred, and he at the last minute threw off his armor, jumped into the river and swam to the other side. And Genghis Khan smiled and said, such a son should a father have. He Obviously now he's without an army. He's probably got a small entourage. Now he's going around trying to rally people around him. He's royal blood. You know, you make alliances with the local chiefs and everything. But the poor guy ends up getting murdered by brigands. Right? So if you're in foreign territory, you're always in danger. It doesn't matter who you are. Right? That's why when you read the story of when the Abbasids chased the last Umayyad halfway across the world, from Syria all the way to Spain, right? North Africa and into Spain, right? They just chased him from one stop to another stop to another stop to another stop. Miraculous how he survived. And he obviously he went on to found magnificent Al-Andalus in Spain, you know, the Spanish Umayyad Empire. At one time we had 3 caliphs. For your information, we had one Shia caliph and the Abbasid caliph at the same time, and we had the Umayyad caliph in Spain. Was it Granada or somewhere in Al-Andalus, right? So if he had died, that flowering would have taken place, God knows. Right, so how does a typical day look like? The camp stirs pre-dawn. The camels, you need to wake the camels up. You need to move quietly, untying and inspecting animals. Fires from the night before are rekindled for hot water, dates soaked in milk. The Prophet ﷺ later in life would pray Fajr, but even in pre-Islamic caravans, dawn was a time of pause and reverence. Pagan merchants too began the day with invocations to their gods. Water skins topped up, carried from wells or rationed from reserves filled the night before. Scouts mounted early, rode ahead. So the scouts need to be at least half a day ahead, right? A few miles to check terrain, wells and signs of raiding parties. The morning march. Caravans set out, camels loaded the night before, kneeling to be packed and raising with the groans, right? You can see this on YouTube as well, how they load up the camels and the camels have to just get up with 100 kg weights. An evil sport in Pakistan is where they have like a weightlifting championship with the camels. They will load this camel up with up to 300 kg, and I think it's 300 kg, and they will get this camel to stand up, right? This is abuse, but you could look at those videos, at least look at them and get an idea of how it was done with the fully loaded camels. Lead camels with flags or standards, merchants and armed guards interspaced, outriders on horseback, flankers on foot, herd boys and servants at the rear. Pace steady 3-4 kilometers an hour, broken by short halts every 90 to 120 minutes. The atmosphere, traders converse, children if present ride atop loads, scribes recording inventories, music and rhythm. This is where the Bihar of the Arabic poetry was born, right? We discussed poetry and we looked at all the different, they call Bihar as in like the sea, right? I.e. the movement of the waves, and the camel moves, right? And the poetry is done to these movements, the scales, and there's about, was it 18 of them we looked at? And if these guys could literally sing, and depending on the rhythm of their singing and their poetry, the camels would move. So the camel drivers chant rhythmic Khuda songs to keep the animals moving. Mid-morning snack, handful of dates, flatbread or parched barley chewed on the march. No stopping. If you want to go to the toilet, ain't no 1,000 caravans going to stop for you. You need to run off somewhere, do your business, out of sight, and come back and make sure that nobody's gone, because if they're gone, you're on your own. And we have a story like this in the Seerah as well. This concerns Rasul's wife. And it created a scandal which Allah exonerated her, and we will look at that when the time comes, inshallah. Midday rest around Zohar and noon. Camp, again, you need to find shade. If there's no shade, you create shade. Tents or awnings pitched, camels unburdened and hobbled. Food, dried dates by the way, yeah. Water diluted with nabid, pre-Islamic light fermentation or yogurt drink. Men would sleep, servants tend wounds or sore feet of their own and the animals grave if pasture nearby, you've got to go and find some stuff for them as well. Security guards posted. Midday was a vulnerable time if raiders struck, because you're all asleep and it's too hot. And if they're coming they're coming from the side of the sun, you don't see them. Business talk, merchants discuss market gossip, recite poetry or plan deals for arrival in Syria. Then the afternoon march, they load up again, camels reloaded, ropes fastened. March resumed slightly shorter leg than the morning due to heat, fatigue, water discipline. Camels watered every few days. Humans rationed to one small skin shared amongst several. Scouts returned reports, confirmed next night's stop, whether wells are functional and if other caravans passed. Occasional visitors, desert tribesmen approached to sell fodder. So these desert guys would know you're passing. These are like pure Bedouins. They would approach you and say, look, we've got this for your camel. We need in return probably leather or probably rope or something like this, or milk or honey. Not milk, sorry, they have their own milk, but you know, stuff like that. Or they would say, listen, you know, they're the highwaymen, right? So now they've approached you and you've got to pay them off, sometimes thinly disguised as protection money. Evening, near Maghrib time now. Again, the campsite has already been chosen because of the scouts that went ahead, usually near a well or a grove or a defensible rise, if unsafe, open desert with wide visibility. Forming the lager, camels made to kneel in a circle or line, loaded, stacked inside as a barrier. So you'd basically, you'd fortify yourself as best as you could, right? With the weakest of people inside, and then, you know, like that. Fires lit for cooking and to signal size, strength of caravans. Sometimes fires deliberately lit, spread out to appear larger. Meal, flatbread, baked on stone. Look at this now, right? So this is what they would do, right? So they would make a fire and put stones on the fire, and then those stones were hot, and then they would get like bread dough that was knead, very rough, with bits of sand in there, and they'd put it flat on that rock, and that would cook it, and then they'd chew it, half burnt. This is how primitive people did it when they first learnt farming 6,000 years ago in Sumeria. Stones, pottage of lentils or barley dates. These are luxuries. This is all luxuries now, right? Dried meat, rehydrated if supplies allowed. Prayer. This is later Islamic caravans. The Rasul would lead salah in congregation. In pre-Islamic times, poetry and invocations filled this slot. The night routine. Guards posted. Men rotated in ships, standing with spears or bows at perimeter. Your camels are hobbled, forelegs tied loosely, so they could graze but not too far. Entertainment, poetry, stories, past journeys, genealogies, recited sometimes small dice or board games. Bookkeeping, scribes and agents tallied stocks, checked loads, noted losses. Correspondence, letters were going back and forth, by the way. Sleep, most on mats or cloaks spread on the sand, heads propped in saddlebags. Merchants kept valuables near. Right? Bandits, raids, quick and sudden. They come very quickly. This is what it would look like, by the way, that picture. Sudden at the weakest hours, the last third of the night. Fires sometimes doused to keep the camp obscure. Animal danger, scorpions, snakes, prowling hyenas. Sudden weather, sandstorms, high winds, animals had to be calmed, loads secured. So a caravan's daily rhythm was a careful choreography of movement, rest, vigilance and commerce. So morning and evening was progress, midday was rest, evening was food preparation and rest. Right? Now, if you want to do some extra reading, it's always interesting to read real accounts to double furnish what you've learned, to get like a visual imagery, right? So Western Oriental scholars and travelers passed through these areas, and they did describe, I'm just going to go through them quickly. They describe the routes, they describe daily life, hazards and tribal politics, right? So it's useful for reconstructing the journey of how it may feel. D.T. Potts, this is in, it's a paper of about 38 pages. D.T. Potts wrote this academic paper. You can download it online. I'll give you the link to it as well. He describes trans-Arabian trade routes. Right? It's a scholarly reconstruction of ancient Arabian routes, uses archaeology, topography and classical sources. That's why I love it. It gives maps, distances, water sources and likely stages of caravan journeys, valuable for understanding our traders' plan, daily marches, lengths and water logistics. It's a broad survey, not a narrative of one caravan. Right. There's another book called The Syrian Desert, Early 20th Century Travel Accounts, focuses on desert Syria and routes towards Damascus. This one describes wells and oases, risks and raids, Bedouin alliances and stuff like this. Right. It's environment to rich descriptions similar to what Meccan caravans faced, but it's later, right? So it's, you know, some practices do change, but then again, they don't really as well. Here's another one from the 16th century. right? This one describes the encampments, guard duties, trading stops, food and rationing, desert hazards and disease. So each of these books or treatises or a series of monologues have something different to offer, right? So it gives a vivid day in the life of a caravan. This was 900 years after Rasulullah under the Mamluk Ottoman rule, but still it's worth reading. So what the accounts give us, they give us concrete details, routes, wells, daily marches, atmosphere, right, and everything. But what they lack is exact 6th century documentation. No Orientalist witnessed pre-Islamic caravans, contrast with permits only, and they only inferred the contracts and the permits and stuff like that. And there's colonial bias as well, by the way, yeah, right. And then there's the Arabian romance, the whole idea of the Oriental romance, where they exaggerate stuff, mixing trade versus pilgrimage caravans, which had different organization priorities. But it's good to read. This is what it's all about, the whole course. Use the books wisely if you're going to read. Treat them as ethnographic echoes. Caravans of later centuries still show much continuity. This is why I made a whole video on Thizaj's journey across the desert in the 1950s, because that was probably the last time in the Arabian Peninsula they were still doing it. After that, 4x4s and AC and everything came into Arabia. In Africa, you could still YouTube caravan crossings across the Sahara and just watch, and it's not a glamorous sight, put it that way, right? No desert stopping, no desert caravan crossing is a glamorous sight. Forget Lawrence of Arabia and all that nonsense, right? It's really brutal, really, really brutal. And you still get it with these African people, these Amazigh and Tuareg and some of the from the Sahel traveling the Sahara. And it's a good idea to watch those documentaries. When you read these books, compare them to the original sources, what Tabari says, Ibn Hisham, and to balance the atmosphere. And then there's the pre-antiquity, right? So these are sources that go back thousands of years, right? So they're not sources, but they're archaeological records. So again, if you're interested in this, go and see these records, archaeological excavations. We covered a lot of this, right? Lihyan, Didan, the kingdom of Didan. It's even today, if you go there, you can see structures for trade, lodging, markets, even water storage. There's a massive cistern there with various epigraphic writings on there from different languages. There's the river Aftan, Wadi as-Sahba route, more archaeological, again, evidence that routes functioned as trade paths, right? Pre-Islamic trans-Arabian route, this is that same thing I told you, by the way. So this is the reference to it, right? So if you go onto, you can copy and paste this link once I ever make this into a PDF, hopefully soon, inshallah. Academia, this is the actual link, or you could just search this citation here and it will bring up the document I mentioned. Then Muslim accounts from medieval. So Ibn al-Mujawir in the 13th century in his Tarikh al-Mustabir, Chronicles of Observer, he traveled to southern Arabia along the Red Sea from south, and he described the markets, taxes, customs, currency, weights, measures in ports such as Aden, gives an account of how trade between inland and coastal towns worked. Ibn Jubair in the 12th century, his Rihla travelogue describes pilgrimage travel, but also the caravan context, roads and everything. It's pilgrimage orientated, which gives you another take. And so these are some of the limitations. Many medieval accounts are centuries after early Meccan accounts, but traditional methods don't change. But some stuff like toll plazas and the Romans and all that sort of stuff is obviously not going to be there anymore. Many travelogues are pilgrim journeys, which function different than trade journeys, right? Their emphasis is different. Ancient sources often fragmentary inscriptions, geographical lists, but really daily logs of a full journey, fragments. And then there's bias as well, so be careful about exotic Orientalist stories. And there's a documentary, 4-hour documentary. I did recommend this to you. I linked it in one of the earlier lectures. You can watch it again. It's the frankincense trowel. It's on YouTube. Okay, it's ending now anyway. So I think this was it. Yep, this is it, and then we'll carry on inshallah next week. So this, I hope this has given you a much deeper and clear understanding of what Prophet Muhammad ﷺ went through when he did that famous journey for Halima Sa'diyah, Khadijatul Kubra Salam alayha. Any questions before we finish?
No, but thank you as always, Sheikh. Some of the vivid imagery was fantastic. I really enjoyed that. It was a split second where I was transported into the middle of the Levant.
Right, that's what I wanted. And if you follow it up now, if you follow it up by looking up these cities and the archaeological sites and looking at caravan journeys while it's all fresh in your mind, you know, it's just gonna reinforce this imagery, because this is the imagery that Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam saw. All right, okay, so thank you very much. May Allah reward us, and inshallah we'll carry on with this caravan journey next week, because this was the background to the journey that Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam took. So now we're just going to talk about his journey next week, inshallah. And then he comes back from that journey and marries Khadija, and we'll talk about that, inshallah. Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
يليق بكماله اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على أسعد محمد وعلى آله عدد كمال الله وكما يليق بكماله اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نور الهدى محمد وعلى آله عدد كمال الله وكما يليق بكماله اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.